Hello there.
Hey,
This is our first video podcast.
it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. So we'll see how this goes.
Took a while to get here.
Yeah. So we'll just kind of see if this is a good thing or not.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do people like seeing us on camera, or do they prefer to just hear our voices?
Yeah, we're experimenting here.
Yeah. Dreza's going to try to not cough into the mic, and I'm going to try and not have my chair be squeaky.
Yeah, I'm glad you saw my face. It's like, speaking of trying not to be loud.
Yeah. Dreza's been coughing and trying to clear her throat and just trying to not cough into the mic.
So, real quick, just thinking about podcasting and all the podcasts that we've listened to, that's something that I've never even considered. Do they cough? And if they have, I guess I've been so into the topic that
It didn't matter to you?
it didn't matter to me. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah, I don't think we have like a little mute button on any of our equipment. So
Going
cough,
real basic.
you will probably just hear a cough. And welcome to our world. This is what it is. So I think last time when we were talking about our first year of marriage.
Yep.
And we got up to, I can't remember. What was the last thing we talked about? I didn't go back and listen to that episode.
Yeah, well, I don't know that we were necessarily going chronological, but we kind of just recapped some of the first year stuff and things that happened.
Okay.
And so we're going to kind of just pick up in second year.
Our anniversary is March 1st.
Yeah.
Of every year.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that never changes. Ezra and I were talking about dates that do change today in homeschool.
Like Thanksgiving.
Yep, and Easter
Mm-hmm.
and Mother's Day.
But not our anniversary. It is in perpetuity.
Yes, it is.
So, anyway, I don't know where to go with that. But anyway, so from March 1st, I'm trying to think. So March 1st, that was a year into our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
We were, I was still in school, and I ended up graduating in May.
Yep, spring of 2015.
Mm-hmm. Spring of 2015. You were still working as a teacher, and that was an interesting time of our lives. Just kind of free floating. I think we probably had surplus money compared to what we had ever had before.
Yeah, we did have surplus money
Because we were like, you've got a real job.
Wow.
And benefits.
Benefits.
But it had been a pretty rough year for you, trying to be a first year teacher. So even though it had been like really good from a relational standpoint, you were kind of like, I don't really want to do this again. Yeah, because you were going back and forth between two different schools. You'd never taught Spanish before, and you were basically having to build out the curriculum for two different schools with two different administrators who had differing expectations for you. And yeah, that's interesting. Like looking back on that, I had forgotten there were some tensions there too, because I was also free floating more because I was in school. I had a part-time job.
Yeah, you definitely experienced more freedom than I did. Whenever I was teaching, it felt like I was locked in.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways it was like, you're in school and working, but it was like you're still able to grab coffee with friends and, just had more of a lax schedule. I could stay up till
1 a.m. working on my paper.
Yeah, because your class didn't start till like 10 o'clock or something like that. And I was like, I need to be at school by 7:30.
Yeah, so
Monday through Friday.
I need to go to bed early so I can get my 8 hours of sleep. I'm like, but we have things we can do. So yeah, I forgot about that. I guess that was maybe a place of tension in our first year, but yeah, that was in comparison to what we've gone through since then. That's pretty.
Yeah, that was pretty mild.
It was pretty mild.
Yeah.
So
you graduated.
I graduated, and you decided you weren't going to teach anymore, and I was gonna go look for employment. And so we were living off of your teacher's salary through the summer. Yeah. And we decided that we had really wanted to go on like a long trip to Costa Rica for our honeymoon, but we didn't have the funds for it, and we didn't have the time whenever we got married. And so we decided we were gonna do that. And
It's
so
like a graduation / first year anniversary trip.
And so we planned a trip to Costa Rica
On the cheap.
We took public transit.
We took backpacks.
Just backpacks. We took Spirit Airlines, just backpacks. And I guess we were gone for about a week?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm trying to remember what all we did. We first went to the mountains.
And that was cooler. We stayed at hostels. There's some really nice hostels with like breakfast included. It was amazing.
Yeah. And then we ended up down in, what is that? I can't remember.
If you hadn't asked me.
Yeah. I'd have to go back and look. We Manuel Antonio Park.
Yes, it was Manuel Antonio.
Yeah, that's where we were.
Manuel Antonio.
Yes. And thank you. And that was great. You had to be careful because the monkeys would steal your backpack and take it up a tree. And all we had were our backpacks that had like all of our stuff. So we were constantly kind of having to
strap them down to like tree. Yeah. In such a way where they wouldn't yank them. But that was
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say we went to the Manuel Antonio Park, and that was really fun. And with the park, they had tour guides, remember?
That's right.
But we were doing it on the cheap, and so we were like, we're going to bypass the tour guides and just guide ourselves. And that was a good time.
It was great. We got to hang out in the park for a day, and but like I said, we rode public transit everywhere, so we rode the buses, and and then on our last day in Costa Rica, we went to San Jose.
Yeah, because we were flying out of San Jose.
And we got there, and we had all day in San Jose. And so we went, and we were just kind of taking public transit around, walking around.
Having such a good time. Got there early.
And then we got to the airport, and we were waiting for our flight. And then we realized that our flight, which we knew was an early flight.
Was it like midnight?
It was like 1 a.m.
Yeah.
Was that morning that we had spent the entire day in San Jose, not the following morning.
Yeah.
And we were sitting there. We didn't have very good Wi-Fi, and we were sitting in this little cafe waiting to be able to check in. We had a really great day. We'd just been chilling. And then I was looking at something, and I looked at Dreza, and I said, "Oh no, we missed our flight." And you're like, "What do you mean we missed our flight?" I was like, "This morning." And oh gosh, the terror.
Yeah, your face was
horror. I was like, "Oh my gosh, how did we do this? We spent the entire day. We're gonna have to get new flights, and we didn't have a ton of extra money."
No, we didn't. We had budgeted basically like to the penny. It felt like.
Yeah, and so we had to go down to the ticket counter and basically haggle with the ticket counter
and explain our situation.
And they were able to get us onto a flight, but it threw off everything. And that was in July, right? Because I guess it was also kind of a birthday trip for you.
Yeah,
right?
Was it in July?
I think it was. I think it was in late June, early July.
Yeah, yeah, it was somewhere around there.
Yeah,
it was like we were celebrating a lot of things. So
yeah, and so anyway, so then we got back to Nacogdoches, and we were home, and I started, I had been applying for jobs, but I hadn't gotten anything, and so I kind of doubled down and was applying for things. And this is where I guess the story gets maybe more interesting to me. Like, I think these are the things that I talk about probably more, is like that season of our lives, because that was the first time I'd never been able to get a job. I think I applied for something like 150 jobs at that time.
That's wild.
And
yeah,
across
it was a lot.
And across like a wide array of different things. Basic entry-level jobs, Walmart. I applied at like warehouse jobs. I applied basically anywhere that I could, and it started to get pretty desperate. And I had some other friends who were in the same boat as I was, and they ended up getting a job at a call center. And so they were like, "Hey, you should come work at this call center." And so I went and I applied at the call center. And in looking back, I really think the Lord was just protecting me from. He was teaching us a bunch of lessons during that time. He was showing us a lot of different things. And the thing is, this call center was, it was a company, and basically it was kind of a thing where it was like, hey, you should be able to get a job here. This is the place where you can just, anybody can kind of get a job.
It's so easy to get a job.
So easy to get a job. And so I went and I applied, and because I already had a college degree, I got pulled in. It was like, hey, we'd love to have you as like some sort of manager or something. And so it started this whole conversation, and we ended up basically realizing like, hey, we want you to talk to like this operations person. And so this conversation continued, and it was like, hey, you have a job. We really want you. We're just trying to find the right place. We love you. And so this conversation was continuing, and it ended up continuing for like 10 weeks. Mm-hmm. Of back and forth emails, me checking in, asking. Meanwhile, I had started to apply for other jobs.
Right, because after a while, you were like, well, maybe I get a job here, and maybe it is better paying, like they're saying, but at that point, you just needed a job.
Mm-hmm. We had been, at that point, because you had actually gone back to school. That was the other part of what you were doing, is you were trying to go back to school. We had kind of said, hey, I'm out of school. Let's go ahead and have you go back to school so you can focus on nutrition, which is your passion. And so you had started school. You're going back to school. We were trying to pay for that out of pocket so that we weren't going into any debt.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up that I couldn't get a job like anywhere. It was wild. I'd never had that experience before. And then I think it was in probably September, October, we found out that you were pregnant with Bethel.
Was it then? Because I was not feeling great when I got back from Costa Rica.
Yeah.
I wasn't feeling terrible right off the bat. Mm-hmm. Just clear my throat. Sorry.
Oh, gotcha.
I wasn't feeling terrible right off the bat, but then I think maybe a few weeks in, I was like feeling not great. And I had some symptoms, and I was like, maybe it's something I ate in Costa Rica. I'd been in Costa Rica before and didn't have any issues. And so, but I was like thinking of all the reasons why I was feeling bad. And I went to, I think it was Megan's wedding shower. She had just gotten engaged, it was their engagement party. And so some of my college best friends and I got together for the engagement party, and I was not feeling well that weekend. And one of them was like, I bet you're pregnant. And I was like, I'm not pregnant. What are you talking about? And all weekend they were like, you're pregnant. You should go take a test. And I was like, I'm not pregnant, and I'm not taking a test. You can buy me a test if you want. But it ended up that I was pregnant, and I didn't find out I was pregnant until I was like 13 weeks or 14 weeks. And all those symptoms were first trimester symptoms. So by the time I found out I was pregnant, I started feeling better.
Yeah, and you were also in school.
Yeah.
During that time. Mm-hmm. And so I was looking for a job. I was applying for jobs. I was trying to get jobs to no avail. And we ended up getting into some pretty desperate where we were behind on our rent. I think we ended up having to apply for food stamps at that point. Yeah, I think we were on food stamps at that point. And it was the most baffling thing to me, because
you were doing all the things that you're supposed to do. You were applying for all the jobs. You were dropping by some of those places like State Farm.
Yeah.
And you were dropping in. I think some of them were like, oh, yeah, we'll check your application. They never got back to you. So then you would apply for other jobs.
And then other ones were like, yeah, you'd be a great fit. And I would have like 2 interviews, and then I would literally never hear back from them.
Yeah.
And like I said, in retrospect, I can see where I think God was just he was putting me through and us through a refining process.
Yeah, we sing a lot of songs about that.
What?
Like worship songs about refine me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, when you think about what refining actually is, it's specifically with like a precious metal. It's where you actually put it underneath, you put fire underneath or heat underneath it, and you heat it to an extreme temperature. So all this stuff will come to the surface that is impure, and then you'll take that off the top.
Yeah.
And for us, that really was a very defining moment in our lives, because that was the first time I'd ever been in a position where I wasn't working, finding out that we had a baby on the way. You were in school. We were trying to figure out, like, you can't work because of the class load that you have. And we were just, in a lot of ways, just feeling really, really stuck.
Yeah.
And that was actually where I think community around us was really... That was the first time I think that we experienced the need for community, not just for people to be around, but to actually draw on. We had a couple named Brian and Katie who we had been hanging out with them, and they actually came to us at one point and said, hey, we see that you're struggling here, and we want to help you. So quite literally, I think Katie said, like, texted you and said, whatever it is that you need, I'm going to ask you, and I just want you to tell me how much you need, and we will send you money. Yeah,
they said that they were going to budget us into their budget, which I think we were both floored by that. We were like, what? And so every month they
would check in
and say, okay, how much do you need this month? And they didn't ask specifics. They weren't like,
checking in on us,
what are you spending money on? It was like very much like...
Nice. We had some technical difficulties learning new things. All right. So what I was saying, I think, before things cut was that, just them not having like expectations. You had messaged Katie recently and had talked to her, I think probably through Marco Polo. We were just saying, that just the lack of expectations and not lack of expectations, the lacks of like strings, or like, hey, so what are you actually going to do with this? This, or I need you to give me like an itemized budget of all the things that you're going to spend this on.
Right.
It was just, hey, tell us what you need. And what I was going to say, I think where I was going with it is, for anyone who's never been in a situation like that, where you're broke and you are doing the best that you can, the most humiliating thing in the world is to have to ask for help. Like, it just is. It's extremely difficult. Whenever you're doing everything that you know to do, whenever you're trying to use the connections, you're asking people for jobs, it's a very humbling experience. And even, I think, having talked to people recently I know who are on food stamps, who have been trying to, do everything they can, but it's just life has happened. We've kind of stigmatized that in our culture, to where when you need that help, it's like, oh, you must be kind of a lazy person.
Yeah, you're doing something wrong.
You're doing something wrong
for needing help. It's shameful to be in that place.
It is. And I think what I really would just say is, like, as a person who has been there, it's extremely hard to ask for help. it's extremely hard to do that, because quite frankly, it feels like you're admitting that you're a failure. You're admitting that you're not good at things. You're admitting you can't take care of yourself. And in a culture that's very much kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get it done. It's just it's a very difficult place to be. And so when you add that next layer of kind of the strings attached aspect, where giving with I'm going to give to you, but I need to know where it's going for me to be like a good steward. For the person on the receiving end of that, it's a humiliating experience. And so I'm very grateful that we have not been on the receiving end of that kind of experience ever, but it's because the people in our life and the people in our community didn't expect that of us. I have known people who did have that happen to them, though. I have heard stories like that. And I think the people who give in those situations have good intentions because they're trying to be good stewards, but I think at the same time, just not recognizing like what it's like to be in that position.
Right, you're already in such a low place, in that position, and to have somebody say, "Yeah, I'll help you," but like it says, like, I don't trust you to manage your finances well. It feels like a judgment. It feels like I'm trying to help you because you're in need. I'm trying to do the right thing. But it feels like you obviously did something wrong to get in this place, so I'm going to step in and be your like supervisor.
Your life coach, essentially.
Yeah, and that feels icky. Yeah.
And I would say, just along the way, we had a lot of other people who were in our community who were great and very supportive. I'm sure there were other people who along the way, and I can think of some right now who helped us out and gave us money along the way because they knew we were having difficulties. The reason we bring up Brian and Katie is because it was such a tangible thing, and it was something we didn't ask for. It was something that they just saw a need and just did it. And I think part of the reason Dreza and I were kind of debating a little bit about whether or not we wanted to walk through like the different years of our life and how deep we wanted to go in these intros. But I think one of the things that we discussed is that these were marking experiences on who we are as people. So as we're talking about our life and as we're talking about our journey, these were things that actually marked us. And I actually messaged a guy today who I used to meet with whenever we lived in Nacogdoches, named Rick. And Rick is awesome.
Rick's great.
Yeah. And he is one of those people that just demonstrates the heart of Jesus. He did some dental. He was a oral surgeon, and when we were broke still, and you had like dental work, and I think he did this for numerous people, but he would just out of his own pocket just do oral surgeries.
Yeah, and then say, "Don't worry about it,"
which was huge.
Because
you had like some really bad, like an abscess or something in your tooth. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah. But I definitely needed some work done, and it was going to be pretty expensive.
It was, and I think it's those kind of things that just along the way, it's like, wow, just the generosity that we've been shown. And that actually is one of the reasons, like one of our core values is being generous, because and we haven't always been able to be generous in the way that we've wanted to, but just that being something that we value highly is generosity and giving, whether that's giving food or giving time or whatever it is that we have, trying to be open and generous with those things.
Yeah.
And I think that's because of those experiences. And so I did finally get a job, but hilariously, it wasn't a job that I actually applied for. It was actually through the church. One of my good friends, Josh, just mentioned to one of the pastors that, hey, Dan's really struggling over here, and they ended up, it was also just really great. They actually cut us a check for while we were there to help out some, and then they gave me recommendations to other people, and I ended up getting a couple of part-time jobs. One was at a fast food restaurant, and then the other one was with a really great guy who owned a business where we would go in and we would wax floors. So I would go in and wax floors at night, and then I would go work at this fast food restaurant
during the day.
It wasn't paying the bills, but it was work, and it's what the Lord gave me. And so what's part of the interesting, I guess, way that this starts to go is a lot of my identity, I started to realize, had been wrapped up in being able to hold a job or being able to get a job or working. And I think having a family, there was even more of that.
Yeah, there was more pressure added.
There was more pressure, and I think there was more identity. And so that crucible, like I was talking about before, was really, really kind of bringing that to the surface. And when I finally was able to get these two jobs, there was a level of it which was like, I finally have identity. I'm finally doing the thing.
Right.
It's not paying the bills, but at least I'm doing this thing. But the fast food job, I was pretty miserable.
You were.
I was. It just wasn't. I wasn't really good at it, and I ended up. But I worked as hard as I could, and just kind of was telling the Lord, like, I'm going to be thankful for what I have. I was making minimum wage. I was getting like 10, 11 hours a week or something like that.
Yeah, it was less than 20.
It was really minimal. But it's what I had. And so I was just being faithful with it. And I had a friend who was getting married, and I wasn't going to be able to afford to go to his wedding. But I think my mom and dad pitched us some money so that we could go. And so we ended up going to that wedding. And on the way there, you were asleep. This would have been in January of 2016.
Yeah,
right?
So I was pretty pregnant.
2016. And Bethel was due in March.
Right.
Correct?
March 8th.
March 8th. And I was we were on this road trip. We were going to this wedding. You were asleep, and I was just thanking the Lord. I was just like, thank you so much for this job. Thank you. And just kind of mustering up praise, because it was super tight, super hard still. And I had this distinct moment where I heard him say, "All right, Dan." He'd been telling me every single time that I had been praying about it, just to submit to the place that I have you in, just to submit to the place that I have you in. And as we were driving, I was expecting that same. I was just thanking him, because I was like, I'm submitting to the place that you have me in. And I remember him saying, "All right, cool. I want you to go ahead and quit Chick-fil-A." He didn't say cool. He just said, "All right, Dan, I want you to go ahead and quit Chick-fil-A." And immediately I was like, that's got to be me, because I just got this job. And what's interesting is the thoughts that started to flood in at that moment were, what are other people going to think if I quit this job? What are we going to do money-wise if I quit this job? I haven't been able to get a job. This is the only job I've been able to get. So all of a sudden the identity, all of a sudden the fears about the future, the things about the fear of like how other people are going to respond, because people knew I hadn't been able to get a job, and I had finally gotten this job, and it wasn't actually paying the bills, but it was
a job.
And so all the way through that weekend, we stayed at like a friend's house, and I can't remember all the circumstances of it, but I distinctly remember being there, and then we were driving back from that wedding, and on our way back, I was just praying, and you were asleep again, and I was praying, and I was saying, because the thoughts were just in my mind, because it was like I'm like all this fear, all this chaos, all this like everything was just running through my mind, and I said, Daddy, if this is actually you, I really need a clear answer. And I heard him say, Than, like almost like clear as like someone being in the room with me. I heard him say, Than, I'm calling you out to dance on the waters with me. Are you going to join me or not? And I was like, oh, okay. Here's the deal. If I'm gonna do this, if Dreza wakes up from her nap and she's okay with this, then I'll do it. But she has to be okay with it. And so I waited about 40 minutes driving down the highway, pondering this in my head.
Well, I was taking a nice nap.
Were you taking a nice nap? You woke up, and we talked for a little bit, and then I said something along the lines of, so I have something really crazy that I need to run by you, which since this point in time, I feel like I have said those very words numerous times.
A lot in the last 10 years. And I usually sit back and I'm like, all right, what is it?
What is it? And I said, I think I'm supposed to quit I'm supposed to quit this fast food job. And your response was, all right, if you feel like that's what God's telling you to do, I want you to do it. Which suddenly put it back on me, and I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? So I ended up, got back into town. I think I had work the next day I worked, and then I went in the next day and just was like, hey, I don't know how this normally works with fast food. Do you need me to turn in a 2 weeks notice? Do you not? And I was told, yes, you really need to turn in a 2 weeks notice. And then they asked me, why are you quitting? And I said, well, this is going to sound strange, but it's actually because God told me to. And they were like, okay, like, why are you really quitting? And I was like, no, that's actually the reason why. And they were like, okay, cool. Well, yeah, go ahead and turn in your 2 weeks notice. So I went back home, which was walking distance because I was walking to work.
We walked a lot.
We walked a lot because gas costs money.
It did, yeah. So I don't think that was the main reason why we walked a lot.
So originally our first year of marriage, we just walked because we were close to things.
Yeah.
But especially when
the second
year,
because we had the truck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were walking a lot. I was walking to work. I was even in like the rain and stuff because we didn't have money to burn fuel.
Right.
And so I walked back down there, and you actually walked with me for me to turn in my
your 2 weeks notice.
2 weeks notice.
I went with you.
So we walked back down, I turned in my 2 weeks notice. We walked out the doors, and we were walking down the sidewalk, and I got a call on my phone, and it was one of the elders of. And maybe he wasn't an elder at the time. He was, but he was like a mentor figure to us, Scott.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and he was like, "Hey, are you still looking for a job?" And I was like, yes, I am. He goes, "Okay, I have one for you that I think you can almost certainly get. It's at a funeral home, and it pays $9 an hour." Which was like almost $2 more than what I was making, and it's about 20 hours a week. So I went from 10 hours a week.
That's 7.25.
Yeah, to 20. It was like, oh gosh, I'm gonna have like more money, which is so funny looking back. But it was like that was like so monumental. I was like, this is great. So for the next week, I was ecstatic because I get to go work at this funeral home. Most people were not probably that excited about it, but I was like, I'm getting to do this thing. Because I think for me it was God had actually showed up.
Yeah.
And it was like the timing of it. It was like the obedience, and then immediately afterwards, it was him showing up.
Yeah, I felt like he rewarded your obedience.
Mm-hmm. And I think if he hadn't done it quite as quickly, I still probably would have done it, obviously, because I already did. But I think it was just, I felt his affection in that moment in a way that, because once again, I had been applying all over. Like, people knew I was looking for work.
Right.
And so the next week I was actually there, and I was talking to one of my managers, and the conversation came up, and I had been talking to people, and the manager was like, "Hey, actually, I have something, can I just tell you?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And he was like, I think you're making a mess of your life. I was like, "Oh." He said, "Yeah, you, like your life decisions are making your life way harder. Like, you really need to reevaluate, like, how you're living." And as we were sitting there, another friend of mine who owned some pharmacy companies texted me, like, while I'm sitting at this table having this conversation, and says, "Hey, are you still looking for a job?" And he's like, "I have a job for you if you want it. It pays $11 an hour, and it's about 20 hours a week." And I was trying to not be rude in that moment, be like, look at this. But I was just like, I just got another job offer, And anyway, it was, and then I had like one more week of work there, and then I was able to start the other jobs.
Right.
But yeah, and then what ended up happening is that Bethel, those two jobs were actually really flexible, and then I was still doing the floor waxing job at night with Zach.
That's right. Yeah.
And
9 to 2.
Yeah, we would go in. I'd leave the house at like 7:30. We'd
meet in the parking lot around 8, 9.
Yeah, and then we'd drive to a place. We would pull up all the furniture
from the restaurants,
strip the floors, wax them, put them back down, bring all the furniture back in, and we'd get done sometimes 2, 3 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the latest was like 4 or 5. I would get back home, and then I would turn around and go work a funeral like the next day. And the funerals, obviously, you can't plan for people to die. Some of my sense of humor really got shaped in that time.
It did. You kind of had, it's either like you cry about this, mm-hmm. or you laugh about some of this.
Yeah, and I was like cleaning the funeral homes at night. I was driving around decedents, which is like a dead person's body, to different places, and to have them cremated or anything. So that was interesting. And meanwhile, at the same time, I'm over here working in this pharmacy. But what ended up happening is that Bethel was actually premature. She was
born at 37 weeks.
37 weeks, but she was pretty small.
Yeah, she was tiny.
And
she was like 5 pounds.
The Lord was just really good to us, because I actually got to be there for all of it. And I was able to work all of my schedules around that, because all of my jobs were so flexible.
Right.
And it really started this whole change in life.
Right.
And what's really great too is, like, there's a book that I highly recommend. It's called A Life Well Spent. And some of the fun part of this story that I think sometimes gets left out is that it was actually that manager at that restaurant who I felt like the Lord told me later that I needed to reach out to him, because he had offered, like, in that conversation too, to actually mentor, to kind of help me figure out financial stuff.
Right.
And I think there was some pride probably that had been wounded in that conversation, whenever I was told that I wasn't doing things well with my life.
Talking about on your part, or
on my part? Yeah, on my part. And probably about 6 months later, the Lord, I was sitting, I think I was journaling, and I heard the Lord say, "You really need to reach back out to him, and you need to take him up on his offer." Mm-hmm. And so I did, which I think was kind of a surprise. And the Lord told me, "Whatever he tells you to do, I want you to do it." And I was like, oh gosh, okay. And so I did. I hung out. I went, met up with him, took him up on his offer. We ended up having a good conversation, and about halfway through, he was like, all right, I've kind of lined out like what I think, financially, what I advise people. And I was like, great. And he goes, so what do you think about that? And I said, well, God told me that I'm just supposed to do whatever you tell me to do, and I'm just supposed to do it, which I think was kind of a little bit of another, okay, probably had never had that happen before. But he is the one who gave me that book called Your Life Well Spent by
Was
Russ
it him
Crossan.
or was it your dad or your mom?
No, it was him. Because he was the one that he let me borrow it, and then I had to give it back to him.
Oh.
But that was a book that was a marking experience for me too, because that book changed the way that I think about time and the way that I think about investing time into my kids. In the show notes, I'll try and post a link to it. But essentially, Crossan's thing is, he says, you only have so much time, so where are you investing it? And treating time as a commodity. And I got that book like as I was working at a funeral home while my daughter was an infant. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like dealing with death on one side. So I'm working all of these funerals and experiencing like what it looks like for people and hearing their eulogies and reading all of their obituaries while I have an infant daughter. And then I'm also looking at this book about time, and the whole thing is him talking to like millionaires and successful people about how there's never no one he ever talked to, he was a financial planner, and no one he ever talked to said, I wish I had spent more time in my business. They all said, I wish I had spent more time with my kids. Yeah. I wish I had invested in them and not so much in this. Right. And so I can even just see the Lord's handiwork in that too, like guiding me into that conversation, guiding me to a place where it's like, are you going to be submissive? Are you going to allow your like wounded pride in that moment from listening to my voice and not being accepted to keep you from this gift that I have for you? Because it was such a gift. And so, that kind of brings us through, on my part anyway, year two. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Not currently. I think that was really good, going in depth into that part. I think it was funny because you were talking about, it's not funny, but it was interesting because you were kind of going through, like, you were applying for jobs and all these things, and I was waiting for you to say, and I was pregnant, which added this like layer of I feel like if it was just you and I, it would have been hard to not have a job, obviously, and to be able to pay for our own stuff. But I think having children just adds another layer of desperation when you can't provide, when you and like you're doing all the things and you still cannot provide. And so I'm glad you went more in depth into that and just kind of what you were experiencing.
Yeah. And it's crazy because what I've started to see is, like, as we submit to what our Father in heaven has for us, like him seeing the entire picture laid out, him being able to see all these different pieces and me not, and he's leading and guiding, and along that like you're touching people's lives. Right. And you don't know the impact that you're having on people's lives as you're going along and you're just faithfully obeying and as you're faithfully moving forward. But being able to have even just this story to tell, being able to talk about his faithfulness, being able to talk about those moments where I did step out in faith, that it didn't make sense, and I was basically stepping out in faith against fears, and against those other things. It shapes you, it even deepens your walk and your ability to the next time take a bigger step of faith. And along our journey for the last little bit, that idea of saying, I'm calling you out to dance on the waters with me. It's not just to walk on the waters. It's to dance on the waters. It's to be in the midst of the chaos and to experience joy and freedom in the midst of uncertainty, even in the midst of feeling foolish. Like, it's kind of dumb to dance out on the waters because you could drown, you know?
Right.
It's like
all
there
these
are waves,
things.
but that's actually, it's safe with him. And another image that I've had just as I've prayed and been conversing with him there have been a couple times where he's asked me, do you want to go back to the boat? Yeah. And I'll, like, in my imagination, like in prayer, like it's almost like he'll turn me around and I see a boat and I see other people in the boat. Mm-hmm. And he said, you can go back to the boat if you want to, like when I'm whining or talking and complaining about being scared. And he'll be like, you can go back to the boat, but you don't get the story. Yeah. And I've recently started to talk about how I covet the story. Like, I want the story. I want the interaction with him. I want to know him and to be known by him more than I want the comfort. Yeah. And it's worth it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it is worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. Mm. So, anyway, that's year 2, I guess.
Yeah, that was that all year 2?
I mean, Bethel was born. She had to go back and forth into the hospital. That was terrifying as a new parent. Yeah. In the midst of that, she basically was losing. It was really, really cold.
Yeah, she was having a hard time maintaining her body temp.
And so she had to take her back in, that was hard. And also working as a funeral home, there was definitely some fears I was fighting. That too. I think we had actually had a couple of infant deaths around that time that people were working in. So, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized that.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure. I know that we had a couple while I was working there, which were really tragic and really sad.
That's awful.
Yep. But, just, yeah. I think that was another place of, like, just having to trust the Lord. And that was just a season of trusting the Lord. So, but year 3 is where we get to learn about Sebastian the beaver. Because that was actually in our 3rd year of marriage. So, that's fun. And we have pictures of that. So I'll try and post those pictures when we do that one.
Yeah.
So
stay tuned.
Stay tuned. All right.